One must never place a loaded rifle on the stage if it isn't going to go off. It's wrong to make promises you don't mean to keep. This quote by Anton Chekhov was initially meant as advice to aspiring playwrights and has become the core tenet behind a literary concept now known as Chekhov's gun. A concept which states that in any given work of fiction, everything within that world should serve a purpose. In principle, this helps an artist to create works that are lean and concise and which lack superfluous distractions, to discard the irrelevant and focus solely on that which advances or enhances the experience. Chekhov's gun is not without its pitfalls, and is certainly not the only way to create a literary masterpiece, but it can most definitely serve as the template for a brilliant body of work to be built upon. The success of whodunit movies, such as the brilliant Knives Out series, is contingent upon it. Chekhov's gun can also exist as just one part of the literary megastructure and serve a purpose without being the purpose. The James Bond movies famously employ the technique with Bond's various gadgets, which are typically introduced early on in the films and then used at pivotal moments as the plot advances. As you can see, Chekhov's gun can be a powerful weapon in the artist's arsenal. And this is exactly why Daniel Craig was cast as the voice of the titular character, John Animalwell, in the video game Animalwell.
Who hired you?
I do not know.
Animalwell was released on May 9th, 2024, developed by Shared Memory, and is the first title published by BIGMODE. Shared Memory is a one-man studio run by a gentleman named Billy Basso, and BIGMODE is an indie game publishing company founded by gaming social media celebrity and YouTube giant videogamedunkey. At a time when many famous YouTubers have found success by being, we'll say, controversial, and many others have been recently discovered to be ungreat human beings, all the while the video games industry at large seems to be collapsing in on itself, it's a pleasure to see that at least one person is staying focused on the topic and trying to make a positive contribution to the landscape. This is an example of what I believe YouTube and YouTubers should be, and it is exactly for this reason that Animalwell has been selected as a video for this series. Please allow me a quick aside. With this, the experience point, being a YouTube channel, and therefore me, a YouTuber, I find the concept of BIGMODE both humbling and inspirational. I have to admit that I can only dream of the kind of success that Dunkey has achieved, but I admire his dedication to the craft, and I hope to see myself in a similar position one day. Successful enough that I can have a real impact on the gaming community, even if it's on a much smaller scale. It stands to reason that Dunkey, with his big personality and unique perspectives on video games and video game topics, would be most interested in publishing games that are going to be original, refreshing, and innovative. But unlike his YouTube videos, which are not always meant to be taken seriously, it seems that he is taking his role as a publisher very seriously.
Hey you guys, it's me, the video game playing donkey from a farm.
BIGMODE is being judicial and deliberate with the titles it has chosen to publish thus far, which amounts to just a total of 2 games. Star of Providence, which released on Steam in 2017 to overwhelmingly positive review, will be ported to the Nintendo Switch by BIGMODE. But this leaves only one original new game being flown under the BIGMODE banner: Animalwell. As the first title published by a rather unorthodox studio, it put a lot of pressure on Animalwell and more specifically one-man development team Billy Basso. Most indie games already struggle with development, marketing, and reception, and the vast majority of them ultimately fail. Not only did Animalwell need to succeed, but it needed to prove that BIGMODE exists for a reason, and that the publisher can be trusted to curate the indie scene and deliver quality titles to the gaming community going forward. For this reason, Animalwell couldn't just be a hit, it needed to be a home run. It's safe to say that commercially, critically, and even objectively, Animalwell has been exactly that. With Dunkey's marketing hype and the game's natural allure, it's no surprise the game found an audience. However, success and quality are not inherently the same thing. With that in mind, there is still value to be had in a thorough analysis of the game. Besides, as a deconstruction, the purpose of this video is not to determine whether or not a game is good or bad, but why it is good or bad, or both. So let's begin. The story is... okay, I'm gonna be honest here, I really have no idea. The thing with Animalwell is that there is absolutely no dialogue or text, there is extremely limited visual storytelling, and the context clues provided by the environment are nebulous at best. Animalwell is a game that is all about mysteries, and nothing is more mysterious than its narrative. If there even is one. Whatever story can be manufactured from the sparse clues found within the well are clearly no more than speculation. There are no concrete answers to any of it, and unless Billy comes out and reveals them himself, it is likely that there never will be. Imagine trying to piece together the story of Dark Souls. Now, take out all the NPC dialogue. Now, take out all the item descriptions. Now take out any sort of context that can be drawn from real-world parallels or human concepts. You see what I'm getting at here? It's an exercise in futility, one that may be fun, sure, but that is ultimately pointless. A thought experiment that can neither be proven nor disproven. Until then, the story of Animalwell is no more and no less than what the player makes of it. So, what about all that Chekhov's gun stuff in the intro? Well, it's a good question, and it's one I intend to answer throughout the remainder of this video. Animalwell is a pixel graphic game with extremely simple designs. Minimalist, lean, whatever you want to call it, the level of detail here is extremely low, which is what makes the fact that it is also absolutely beautiful all that more impressive. But why is that? Well, there are three major reasons: the use of color, the lighting, and the animation. The color palette in Animalwell is certainly limited, and what colors are used are low in saturation. The goal here is to make the player feel like they are wandering around in darkness, and the commitment to that goal is a large part of the reason why the game succeeds in feeling so intimidating and isolating. Color is used to sort of categorize objects and locations, which subtly inform the player how to differentiate between various situations. Furthermore, the color scheme lends its aid by being clever and efficient, which allows the player to easily distinguish between the different objects and locations throughout the game. This goes hand in hand with the lighting. Animalwell has that really impressive modern take on pixel graphic lighting that I raved about in my Sea of Stars deconstruction, and which seems to be becoming more prevalent in modern indie games. But while it was a perfectly enjoyable novelty in Sea of Stars, it had very little impact on the actual game. It was more or less eye candy. This is not the case with Animalwell. Because of its strong focus on ambient darkness, the lighting system is a fundamental part of the game's tone and a boon to its immersion. The practical result is a game that can not only draw attention where it wants, but one that makes excellent use of shadows to create an impressive and oppressive darkness. Tying all of the visuals together is Animalwell's animation, and the animation is just really great. Just look at these waterfalls. Look at this room filled with fans. There's a lot going on here. Check out this firecracker. Boom. The smoke, the color, and the light, and the way it's reflected onto the game world. It's a perfect example of the beauty that Animalwell has to offer. But the point isn't just that the animations themselves are well done, which they are, but all of the things that the developer has chosen to animate. Look at how the grass and the vines interact with the character. Look at these lamps. Just look at the character itself. Look at those eyes. There is so much attention to detail here, so many little animations that have been included for seemingly little or no functional purpose. Notice that I said seemingly little to no functional purpose. Because there is purpose for sure, and there is function. These little touches add tremendous value in terms of the game's ability to express itself and immerse its players, and it's the kind of thing that I personally love to see. But here's the thing, it's actually so much more than that. Take the vines, for example. They're not just set dressing. They interact with the character and even the player in meaningful ways, primarily as a tool to force specific and creative solutions to some of the game's many puzzles. I know, we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's gameplay and we're talking about the visuals. I guess the point I wanted to make is that the visuals tie directly into the gameplay in a number of different ways, and the synergy between these two gameplay elements is not only a necessary component of what makes the game work, but it also just makes the game look and feel great. Animalwell is a game that is bursting with visual presence. While its minimalist charm may not translate particularly well to simple screenshots, seeing the game in motion is a treat for the eyes. It maximizes the potential of its art style and achieves a level of detail and expression that frankly shouldn't even be possible with 8-bit graphics. Its combination of excellent choices, a good usage of color, and a mastery of lighting, tied together with its superb animation, make its allure hard to deny. In Animalwell, the audio is every beat as lean as every beat. There's no Yeah, okay. In Animalwell, the audio is every beat as lean as the visuals are. That's brilliant. And it's an accident, but it's brilliant. Doing the most that it can with as little as possible is truly one of the underlying principles of the game's design, and this is just as true for the audio as it is for anything else. In regards to both the music and the sound effects, nothing is superfluous. Everything is deliberate. In this way, it's important to note that the music and the sound effects, much like the visuals, don't just complement the gameplay. They are an integral part of the gameplay itself. Generally, the music is very subtle to the point where it is almost non-existent. What does exist is often better described as ambiance or maybe even background noise. Low-frequency hums, long, drawn-out chords, running water, howling winds, and yes, animal noises. Part of the reason for this, of course, is to establish mood, and the mood here is, in a word, ominous. The soundscape is designed to make the player feel lost, lonely, isolated, and unwelcome, and it does exactly that. Instilling these and other emotions and guiding the player through a very specific emotional loop is a core tenet of the game that we'll discuss later on in the gameplay section. As for the rare occasions that there is actual music, it is immediately noticeable and it carries a lot of weight. Not because it's spectacularly catchy or technically impressive or rife with avant-garde compositional choices, but precisely because of its rarity. It is a choice that fits Animalwell exceptionally well. It demands the player's focus, creating a real sense of urgency and tension, and elevates that moment's experience tremendously. There are also some other occasional uses of background music in specific areas, such as this save room, which wants to instill a sense of tranquility. Or the egg shrine, which just begs for curiosity. Another way in which the audioscape informs the player is through its sound effects. While little things like water drops or the rustling of grass as the character runs through are nice details, many of the sound effects are more purposeful. Notice how the water spraying here is melodic. This forms a stark contrast to the otherwise almost muted audio experience and draws the player's attention. It's saying, hey, notice me. I might be important. Maybe you can interact with me. And in fact, the player can do just that. Check out these cats. Poor little guys, stuck prisoner down here. But it looks like their cages can be used as platforms, so that must be why they're here. But wait, they sure are meowing a lot. They sound so distressed. They're clearly begging for help. Wait a minute, maybe something or someone can help them. And, in fact, once again, the player can do just that. The sound design of Animalwell is not just unique, it's full of emotion. It can be fleeting, startling, haunting, soothing, but whatever it wants to be, it does so with undeniable effectiveness. It can flip between subtle and intense at a moment's notice as the game requires, amplifying the player's emotions as well as providing subtle insights about the world itself. It adheres to the game's core design philosophy of doing a lot with a little and serves the gameplay in a way that enhances nearly every part of the player's experience. Animal Well starts off with a depiction of 4 different colored fires floating on screen before they suddenly disappear, one by one, as a foreboding bell tolls. Nestled within the petals of a large flower, a mysterious creature sleeps. With no further ceremony, no information, and no instruction, the player is given control of the creature asleep within that flower. A cute, rotund little guy that is most definitely not reminiscent of a certain Nintendo character. No, not that one. You know, the one that shares its name with a household vacuum cleaner. Yeah, that's it. The best way to dive into Animal Well's gameplay is to do exactly that and to let it speak for itself. While it doesn't contain any particularly novel gameplay concept, it is comprised of an amalgamation of various popular genre tropes that perhaps can elucidate the general idea. 2D platformer, Metroidvania, puzzle game, cozy game, horror game. It's really not any of these things, but at the same time, it's a little bit of all of these things. Essentially, it's a 2D platformer slash Metroidvania that has been stripped of more traditional combat elements in favor of puzzles and mysteries. But while Kirby is lacking in more traditional combat options, there are various hazards and other threats that result in a feeling of disempowerment and which make the game world feel dangerous and even a little scary. This common and reliable technique used to give horror games their trademark feeling of dread is combined with a brooding atmosphere and sometimes unsettling presentation to give Animal Well its spooky vibes. For those concerned, it is definitely not a horror game, but it very intentionally uses some of the emotions that those games can inspire to elevate its experience. It's horror adjacent at most. It can be a little eerie, it can even occasionally be startling, but its focus is always on creating tension and not on being scary. For players familiar with modern classics, such as Hollow Knight, or classic classics, such as Super Metroid or Castlevania Symphony of the Night, the initial moments in Animal Well will be familiar enough. But it won't take long to realize that something is not quite right. Why does it seem like the character doesn't have any combat skills or equipment? And where are the enemies? The questions are allowed to linger just long enough before the game swoops in with a masterstroke and answers with crystal clarity. This ghost, the first hostile creature that the player will encounter, can't be defeated. It can only be avoided or temporarily staved off with a freshly plucked firecracker. The exact nature of the blob's relationship with the other inhabitants of the well is uncertain, but the message being sent here is unambiguous. The character is not here to conquer the well. Their only hope is to survive it. And so it goes. The player is left to their own devices to try and navigate the well room by room and uncover its mysteries with absolutely no direction or guidance of any kind. There are myriad roadblocks, unreachable areas, and unpassable creatures that prevent progression until the character has obtained new equipment or the player has gained new knowledge. Any knowledge that the player has acquired is knowledge that they have learned through experience, and any equipment the character has obtained is a result of that acquired knowledge. Because anything that is acquired is earned, it both feels and actually is more meaningful. All that Animal Well will offer are a handful of context clues and, much later in the endgame, a handful of more literal but not necessarily more helpful clues. But before then, it is all about engaging with the game's system and paying careful attention to detail. The game's physics, and its lighting in particular, play a huge role in this aspect. On the physics side, the character's equipment and all of the various objects and creatures inside the well interact with each other in a natural and organic way. Crank the wheel to lift the platform, but the platform slowly descends back into the water over time. It descends much more quickly when the character is on top of it. Bubbles float slowly into the air, but actually descend under the weight of the character. They pop if they hit solid objects. Dogs are menacing and treat the character like a chew toy, unless, of course, they're distracted by an actual toy. As for the lighting, it is very deliberate, as it should be in most games. Every object that is illuminated, and more importantly, everything that is not, is intentional. But while a great many games use lighting to give a player a sense of direction, a focal point, or even subtle clues, Animal Well favors the opposite. For that reason, it behooves the player to pay extra special attention to the areas of each room where their focus is directed to the least. There may just be a tiny, shadow-cloaked alcove hiding a chest, a switch that opens a door, or any other manner of secret. The onus is on the player to be vigilant and discerning and to pursue any questions or curiosities. with vigor. There are no handouts here. By scouring and scrutinizing every room they come across, the player will discover new locations, unlock new abilities, and uncover new mysteries, in a cycle which very intentionally perpetuates itself until the game's natural conclusion. For the game's part, it does an excellent job of leading the player from one puzzle to the next without holding their hand. It accomplishes this by ensuring that while there are almost always several avenues of progression to pursue, the player never feels overwhelmed with unknowns or has to keep track of too many unsolved secrets. The drip feed of new information and context is just slow enough to allow the player to get stuck occasionally, but never for very long or to the point of being legitimately lost. There is a tightrope walk between respecting the player's intelligence and respecting their time that Animalwell, at least for its main route, walks just about as perfectly as a game of this nature can. The Animalwell experience can be accurately described in a number of ways: clever, immersive, opaque, spooky, cerebral, surreal. But it is probably more accurate and more relevant to describe the feelings that the game evokes. Feelings like anxiety, fear, loneliness, and isolation as they work in concert with things like curiosity, discovery, pride, and a satisfaction with one's accomplishments. The reason for this is that while Animalwell is fundamentally a puzzle game, it is not the puzzles themselves that give it its identity, that make it special. What makes it special is its masterful use of emotional coercion, anxiety and tranquility, tension and relief, frustration and elation, the feeling of being unsettled and then settled. The reason this is so effective is because of the brilliant way in which the game evokes emotions that tie into the more dry or sterile concept of simply solving puzzles. In other words, uncertainty and then certainty. The same exact emotional journey one would experience when solving a puzzle. Or at least an emotional journey that runs parallel to it. It was a very deliberate stroke of genius to combine these two experiences into a singular concept because it creates a mechanism for gameplay that is legitimately greater than the sum of its parts. This is doubly effective because of the near-perfect pacing for the ebb and the flow of the player's adventure within the game world, the discovery of questions and the answers to those questions, both in terms of puzzles, as well as the puzzles whose solutions are pieces to even greater puzzles. The emotional beat of being presented with the unknown, the unfamiliar, and slowly reasoning out the details, only to discover that the answers illuminate more questions, is truly the core gameplay loop of Animalwell. And the reason it works so well, why it has such a hefty impact, is because it is mirrored by the game world itself. The moody music, the unfamiliar world, the strange creatures, and the looming threat of danger serve to accentuate and exacerbate the little sense of euphoria that coincides with solving a challenging problem or overcoming a novel difficulty. Here's an example. All the player has to do in this scenario is run over and under these blocks as the creature on the screen walks along a fixed path and activates these switches. This is a very simple puzzle and an even simpler solution, but the danger represented by the blocks heightens the tension just enough to make the process feel rewarding. But this is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that in many cases the solutions themselves are quite clever, and in turn they make the player feel clever. Here's an example of that. It's important to take the time to note that not every puzzle in Animalwell fits into the same category, and the end result is that some are more or less satisfying than others. Generally speaking, each puzzle falls within one of three categories. Some are solved with information, some are solved with understanding, and some feel a bit arbitrary. Simplified, these puzzles can be categorized as what or where, why, and how. So, what's the difference? Information puzzles, also known as what or where puzzles, are very straightforward. This might be something as simple as noticing an obscured path, pressing a switch to open a door, or correctly using an item for its more obvious function, say using the bubble wand to reach an otherwise inaccessible platform. These kinds of puzzles are usually a very mild reward for the player, but they can also have high highs or low lows. Remembering exactly where to go to use a new item or apply new information once it's been obtained can feel great, but having to painstakingly backtrack through room after room because the player didn't remember or didn't even notice to begin with can feel tedious. Combined with the fact that backtracking sometimes means having to repeatedly solve previously solved puzzles, which does sometimes occur, this will inevitably spell frustration for certain types of players. The puzzles that require understanding, the why puzzles, are ones where the solutions are more obscure, which usually makes them more enjoyable to solve. These are the ones that make the player go, aha, and feel proud of themselves for sorting it out. These require not just information, but a creative application of that information that shows a deeper understanding of the world and its systems, and that may not be intuitive or obvious at first glance. These are the puzzles that players tend to treasure the most, to remember the best, and are definitely the most difficult for the developer to craft. Animalwell is at its best in these moments. Out of respect for the game and its players, and the genre itself, I would like to avoid spoiling any of them by providing a specific example here. The final kind of puzzle is the arbitrary one, the how. These puzzles are often solved merely through trial and error or by accident, as opposed to with the intentional application of gained knowledge or understanding. This is not always because there is a lack of context or direction from the game itself, but sometimes it's just because the accidental solution is easier than the intended one. And sometimes it's just dumb luck. Most of the puzzles in Animalwell fall into the desired why category, but in the end there are a variety of puzzles and a variety of ways to solve many of them. Sometimes I feel like my solution may not have been the intended one, and sometimes I absolutely knew it wasn't. But unlike in many other games, my creative solution almost never felt cheesy or like an oversight from the developer. In fact, it was almost always more obtuse or more challenging. Furthermore, unorthodox solutions would sometimes even hinder my ability to solve later puzzles, which used the intended resolutions as knowledge gained for scaffolding. Speaking of scaffolding, oh man, this is a game that builds upon itself in a way that is almost mimetic. One thing leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to another, and so on. The result is a video game with some serious, some honestly mind-boggling depth. While the required path to see the credits roll is a brisk 8 hours or less, and the journey itself is highly rewarding, it would be a mistake to believe that this is where the game ends. In fact, it could reasonably be argued that, at least for some players, this is where the real challenges within Animalwell truly begin. This much is already hinted at, as it's very unlikely a player will have collected all of the eggs or even all of the equipment before this point. What's incredible is that even after doing all that, there is still even more that the game has to offer. And what's insane is that each layer of the game ratchets up the intensity. I will come back to the endgame content soon, and we will discuss it at length, but because there is no way to have any meaningful discussion about that aspect of the game without the use of some fairly heavy spoilers, I want to keep that section of the video quarantined. The important thing to note here is that this is a game that just refuses to stop challenging the player. It has a respectable main path or first playthrough. It has speedrun tools and rewards built directly into the game, which impressively support not only multiple challenges but also multiple categories as well. It has a literal egg hunt for eggheads who want to sink their teeth into more substantial content. And after that, there is yet another collectible hunt that only the most astute and dedicated type of player will be able to complete. And after all of that, the game then coalesces into a cerebral experience so unhinged and disconnected from the original gameplay loop that the only players who will see this part of the game without reliance upon the internet are the intellectually gifted and the absolutely deranged. And this is where Animalwell may, for some, become a difficult pill to swallow. Players who fancy themselves completionists or who value the full discovery of everything that a game has to offer may find themselves in the throes of frustration. I know this because I am one of those players, and I was very frustrated until I came to terms with the kind of game that Animalwell is, and not what I expected it to be. This is due to a fundamental misunderstanding between myself and the game, or the game and myself, and one that has been and no doubt will continue to be experienced by many individuals. There are a number of reasons for that, not the least of which is general standards and expectations set forth by the gaming industry as a whole, but for our purposes, the only real reason that matters is this, and it's quite simple. The whole of Animalwell was never intended to be seen by anyone, much less everyone who plays the game. Admittedly, it was a bit, we'll say, optimistic of Billy to assume that people who enjoy his game would never or could ever be satisfied with their time in the well, while still knowing there's yet more that they can discover, despite not making it clear to those players that they aren't necessarily supposed to. Instead of feeling like, oh, this was the intended conclusion, and any further progression was clearly not designed for me alone to solve, which, by the way, was more or less Billy's intention, they may instead feel like a failure. Why can't I figure this out? What am I doing wrong? what am I missing? These are questions I have no doubt that Billy intended for his audience to ask, but surely not as their final thoughts before walking away from the game entirely. Now, Animalwell was in development for over 7 years and had only developed a small following for the majority of this time. It wasn't until just before its release that the partnership with BIGMODE came into fruition, which caused discourse around the game to explode and expectations for its success to balloon. Therefore, it stands to reason that maybe it wasn't necessarily all that naive of Billy to assume that his game's secrets would remain uncovered. Unfortunately, this doesn't change the pain point that is the game's lack of communication to its players about where the intended ending occurs and where the shared experience is supposed to begin. So, for those of you who may be watching this video who have yet to play the game, I have to warn you that in just a moment I'm going to discuss Animalwell's endgame at length, which will inevitably include spoilers. But before I do, it is imperative that I make one thing absolutely clear. One thing that I wish I had known, and that I genuinely believe all players of Animalwell should be aware of. If you've reached the point in Animalwell where you've collected all of the eggs, then you have reached Billy's intended ending for you. And that's okay. You have, in the traditional sense, 100% of the game. You have done an excellent job, and you should be proud of yourself. Any discoveries beyond this point are extra credit. And yes, there is more to uncover. If you feel so inclined, then by all means pursue it. There are more discoveries to be made, more puzzles to solve, and virtually everything in Animalwell can be solved by just one person. Nothing is impossible, but it is very, very difficult, very time-consuming, and potentially very frustrating. One puzzle in particular may require hundreds of save files. Therefore, my suggestion to you, dear viewer, is this: don't go it alone. Find a friend, or better yet, a group of friends to enjoy the experience with you. Share ideas, encourage each other's progress, and bask in each other's discoveries. This is how Billy wanted you to experience this portion of the game, and I wholeheartedly agree. If enjoying a parallel playthrough with friends is not an option, then I recommend joining the Animalwell community. These people truly understand and appreciate the intended experience and have created some excellent resources for receiving spoiler-free assistance with both subtle and more direct hints available. There is even an option to join a group via BIGMODE's Video Game Book Club initiative, wherein you can play through the game simultaneously with a bunch of other new players and help each other out along the way. This is hosted by the BIGMODE Discord server, to which I will provide a link in the video description. Okay, with that out of the way, I will put a timestamp on screen. Please skip to this section of the video if you haven't yet played the game for yourself, but you someday intend to. After reaching the first ending in Animalwell, the next task for the player will be to collect all of the various eggs hidden throughout the game. There are 64 in total, and I believe I had about half of that when I got to the credits for the first time. The Great Search of the Well in Endgame works a bit differently than most Metroidvanias. Instead of feeling emboldened by new powers and blasting through each area quickly, the player is expected to use their new tools to slowly comb over each section of the well with the same level of attention to detail as if it was their first time seeing each room. For experienced players of the same or similar genres, this might feel like it takes a little bit of wind out of its sails. Usually this sort of thing feels like a victory lap, but with Animalwell it felt a little more like New Game Plus, or like playing the game on a harder difficulty, although it is explicitly not either one of those things. However, the feelings that they invoke were definitely intentional, as evidenced by the ghosts that show up after the first roll of the credits, which make navigating previous areas more dangerous and difficult. The same can be said about items like the top and the bouncy ball, whose only purpose is to send the player back through every nook and cranny of the well to ascertain where such items may even prove useful. The result is a bold game design choice, which, while may enhance and prolong the experience for some players, for others it may just feel like a slog. One of the greatest challenges for a video game developer is to make a puzzle where the reward feels commensurate with the effort required to solve the puzzle, and Animalwell does occasionally struggle with this as well. Many of the endgame puzzles often feel like the only real reward for solving them is the feeling of the pride and satisfaction from doing so. This is because even though there are some very good rewards in the form of new items, there are only a handful of these, but there are many, many puzzles. Oftentimes solving a puzzle is just an egg, or even just simply access to another puzzle. This can drive a player crazy, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing will depend on the player. In other words, the lack of a tangible reward will work for some, and for others, it will not. Let's move on to the meta post-game, the shared experience, or the third layer as it's referred to. The part of the game that was never supposed to be solved by one person. I'll start by giving credit where credit is due. In truth, the game does offer at least one hint that the game's grand puzzles were meant for a community and not just an individual, and that is with the bunny mural. For context, the bunny mural here is solved by the player inputting a pixel-perfect recreation of a picture that is hinted at within the game. The problem is that each save file is given a randomly generated hint which constitutes only 1/50th of the total picture. Therefore, it is literally unsolvable in a single playthrough by one person. Now, if players can discern that the hint they discover for this puzzle is clearly insufficient and conclude either through speculation or through experience that generating multiple save files is the only possible way to solve the mural puzzle, then it serves as a pretty direct clue that any given player is not necessarily supposed to resolve things on their own from here. The issue is that this is the only major clue that I'm aware of which indicates such, and quite frankly is very possible to miss. After all, the point here is to collect all of the bunnies, and this only rewards the player with one bunny. A player could have easily discovered several bunnies already without even so much as finding their piece of the mural puzzle, and will have spent hours, possibly even dozens of hours, assuming their lack of progress is a failing on their part. This is just one example of how the game's intentions may be lost on the player and may prove to become a barrier that prevents them from seeing all that the game has to offer. There may be others that exist as well, but simply put, it is what it is. Part of what makes Animalwell or any game capable of such high highs is that it comes with the risk of some low lows. This is a fundamental concept inherent not only to this game, or video games in general, but all things in life. While it may be perceived as a flaw in the game, the truth is that it's just a simple part of life. The point is this: not all of Animalwell's endgame content is for everyone, and that's okay. For some players, simply seeing the game through to the main path will be more than rewarding enough. For some, the endgame puzzles will only be accessible up to a point, and while that point may fall frustratingly short of the finale, there are a variety of options within the community to carry on. And for a rare, truly exceptional few, they will be treated to one of the most heartwarming and endearing and special climaxes that a video game can offer. BIGMODE clearly wanted their first published work to be a masterpiece, and they couldn't have asked for a better game than Animalwell. The visuals, the audio, and the gameplay are all an interconnected and interwoven tapestry that paint an expertly crafted and impressively detailed player experience. The plot may be an unsolved mystery that is very much open to interpretation, but virtually every other aspect of this work of art serves a function, has a purpose, and enhances the game. While on its surface it appears to be more akin to the Metroidvania style of games, it's more likely to feel at home in the hands of gamers who enjoyed titles such as Fez or Tunic, games that clearly helped to serve as inspiration for this one, the latter of which received a deconstruction video of its own on this channel. While the transition from the main game to post-game content could have been handled more gracefully, it is impossible to play Animalwell and not see the love and the care that went into every little detail. Knowing that this entire world and all of its constituent parts were brought to life by a single individual is as inspiring as it is impressive, and it also makes the entire experience feel more personal, more intimate. To know Animalwell is to share a memory with its creator, to have the pleasure of knowing a little bit of Billy Basso himself, and quite frankly, he's swell. He's swell. Ultimately, Animalwell is the kind of game that, to the best of its ability, gives back all that it's given and more. It has to take some risks and to make some assumptions in order to spread its wings, and to allow the player to do the same. The end result is a game that will come to mean a variety of things to a variety of different players, but one that offers those willing to brave the damp and the dark of the well an opportunity for a very special experience all the same.